Today we want to talk about the ABCs of behaviour management and put in the framework of the ABC iceberg. Today I wanted to chat a little bit about the ABCs of behaviour management. So it's something that OT's probably got at uni, or teachers as well. Parents might have heard of it. They might have kids having behaviour management plans. And I want to take it a step further and talk about something called the ABC iceberg, which is part of the Ziggurat model, which you can get from texasautism.com. So the ABCs of behaviour. You always start with the B, and that's the behaviour. And what I want to say is that the behaviour is not the way we think about it in Australia, where behaviour is synonymous with naughty behaviour or bad behaviour, but it's just the action that happens. That's the scientific way of explaining it. So what actually happened? The antecedent, that's the A in ABCs, that's what came before it, and the C is the consequence. So what typically happens after it? So again, consequence is not how did you punish the kid, but what typically happens after that behaviour. Now, if we go back to the B of behaviour, I want to say that let's keep it at an action level, and I'll give an example in a second to talk about why that matters. So even if I have, and I often have families say, I need you to go into Johnny's preschool because his teachers are upset that he's being aggressive to other kids, or that he's hurting other kids, or that he's attacking other kids. All of those things are completely subjective. We want to bring that back to an objective phrase. And so it sounds silly, but I'm going to say he's not attacking other kids. He's moving his hand towards other kids' faces. That sounds crazy, right? Until I go and watch little Johnny, who has non-verbal autism. He's not very connected. Actually, our goals are that he'll want to connect with other people. And I see that he's got an open face and he's smiling as he approaches other kids. Now, kids aren't used to people batting them in the face, and so they're feeling attacked, but his intentions are to try and connect with them. So when you're a baby and you're 6 months old and you're batting your mum's face, that's really cute, right? Or when batting your dad's face and you gobble their hands, not so cute when the kid's 4. And so it's something we need to work on. I'm not saying it's okay, but what I am saying is that if we don't get the intention right, if we are thinking that it's about being aggressive, we're going to say, no, stop, move away. And what we've just said is, back away, don't try and initiate interaction with other people. Whereas if we see it as an initiation, we can then put in processes where the people around him, the adults particularly, can support and coach him in that process. And then it can be a touch on the arm, or it can be a phrase, or it can be making sure that the child is ready before you move towards them. And we can coach that exchange. We can help the other kid read their cues and help them support the child as well. So sometimes kids are also, it is more aggressive, but that's because they're being defensive. So if this child is focusing in on what they're playing and they see a hand come in to take a car, they might react to that because someone's messing with their plan, or they might feel like someone's going to mess with their sensory systems if they're sensitive to touch. And so they might push that person away, but that's defensive. Again, that's a different way that we need to handle it, because it's not them seeking someone out. It's that we need to help kids approach this child from the front. We need to be there to say, hey, look, Jenny thinks your cards are really cool. Do you think she would be able to play with one of them? She really wants to play with you. So that it's not surprising that child. We can help them predict that approach that's coming in and be able to negotiate that. So again, the responsibility is on us to support that kid. There might be other times where there's something about another child that sets this kid up, and that's harder to deal with, but we look at what that is. What are the antecedents? What's the history? And what's the child's underlying processes that are setting that child off in that moment or causing that behaviour? So there I've just actually touched on what's beneath the surface in this ABC iceberg, and that beneath the surface is their individual differences, their developmental level, their regulatory capacities, and all the things we know about them, as well as their strengths as well, that help guide us in understanding how they've approached that behaviour. Now the last part, the C in ABC, is consequence, and I think it's important to look at that. Consequence is what typically happens after. I worked with a guy, and I had to go into his school because we needed to deal with this behaviour of pushing a child out of the wheelchair and then laughing hysterically. Now, I don't mean to laugh at that, but that was a pretty confronting thing. How do we teach this kid? Do we do a social story about how you don't push kids out of wheelchairs? Do we, what are the consequences? None of the consequences mattered, because actually I'm talking about consequences in the wrong way here, because the real consequence for this kid was when he pushed this kid out of the wheelchair, everyone came rushing in, and the child on the floor and all the adults around lit up like a light and sound toy. And as I observed more, everyone was really worried about this kid. He was a teenager, he was getting big, and they used no facial expression, they used no affect. He had no feedback. People were so hard to read, except when he pushed this kid out of the wheelchair, everyone came rushing in, and they were hilarious. And so what we did was, instead of putting in a sensory diet to help him be more regulated, we put in an affect diet. And so what we did was they played catch, where they went, whoa, with a gym ball, and they threw it back, and he laughed hysterically. And you know what? From that day forth, that behavior never happened, because we were filling that cup that he needed of getting affect and interaction with people. So today's consequence can be tomorrow's antecedent. So if people light up like a light and sound toy and that feels good, then tomorrow we might choose to do that behavior again to get that to happen. As another example, if Johnny's in class and they're passing the book around to read, and he's getting nervous because we know what's beneath the surface, his underlying processes tell us that he has trouble with regulation, he has trouble with reading, and some social difficulties. He doesn't want to look like he can't read. When the book finally gets to him, he's so anxious that he goes blah, 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 and the teacher says, right, get out. Well, guess what? Everyone laughs, he sort of waves as he goes outside, and he does not have to show that he can't read. So that consequence, is that going to make it less likely or more likely for him to show that behavior again? That consequence of getting out of reading is going to be tomorrow's antecedent. So he's more likely to go blah, 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 because yesterday it worked when I did that. I didn't have to show that I couldn't read. And that was more important to him than getting into trouble. So ABCs are antecedent, behavior, consequence. We want to look at what's beneath the surface of that ABC iceberg, and that's their underlying processes, their developmental capacities, their individual differences, and also their strengths. And we need to keep behavior objective and remember that consequence is what typically comes after, because that gives us clues about tomorrow's antecedents. All right. Thanks. I'll see you next time.